So in terms of a crisis, if we're going to define what is a crisis, and if you have any thoughts on what a crisis is, please type in inside the chat box. What do you think a crisis is? And there are many ways to describe a crisis, but you could start off by saying a crisis is when things go wrong and there's potential impact for your brand or your reputation. I put this up here because this is talking about, we all know about the prince, the royal family, the issue they had recently with Prince Andrew, a member of the royal family, who had, there's just a lot going on. And this is what the newspaper headlines globally looked like, although this is mostly UK press that I have here. But this is what, and it has been like this off and on for over a year since this has been raging on. So imagine if you are this kind of person, how would you feel waking up knowing that every morning you are the headline or you're a storyline? So anyways, it's about your reputation at that point. It's not really about how much money you have in the bank, because I mean, clearly this is one of the richest families in the world. So really, it's not really about how, you know, in fact, it's worse when you are very well known, because then the impact is so much more. So a crisis will typically set off a chain reaction, is multifaceted, and it can be complex. And the truth is, a lot of people don't realize this, but every business, every entity, every institution, every brand, every individual, we all thrive on a good reputation. That is the reason why you find, you know, people trying to manage headlines, politicians and all that, trying to make sure that the headlines say good things about them. In very tyrannical governments, you see them clamping down on press freedom, simply because it's not possible. Not having a good reputation is not helpful. Even when you're not doing good things, you need to want to have a good reputation. That's just the way it works, you know, and that is why press freedom is a thing. That is why journalists, people go after bloggers and all that kind of thing, because when your reputation is harmed, it really does affect you. So I hear people saying, you know, I'm from Nigeria and all that. I hear people saying, oh, it doesn't matter in Nigeria. I'm like, where? It matters everywhere on the planet. You know, it matters, because that's why people are very upset when, you know, they get negative press. So let's just get that out of the way. There is nowhere on the planet that you have a leader that doesn't care, or anyone that doesn't care about what is written about them. They are happy when it is positive. When it's not positive, they're not happy. So because it has an impact. If people wanted to invest in your business, people wanted to do things with you, you know, if there's that negative coverage, it affects the way you are perceived. And people don't like that. We're very much social animals, so these things count. And beyond that, it can also affect you, not even apart from society, it can affect you in terms of your business. So I would like to, I think I may go into the chat at this point, because let me just see if there are any things that you want us to know about, you know, where you are. Okay, yeah, somebody has written something about what you expect from today's session. Just let us know, and that would be great. So issue versus crisis, just so that we're not, we talk about our terms very carefully. An issue is different from a crisis. Issues are more common and they come up every now and then. It can happen. An issue is something that, okay, it can happen because something happened to people in your organization, something happened in the environment around your business or community, something happened in terms of your assets. But when it hits your reputation, that is when it is now entering crisis zone. When it affects your license to operate, it's now entering crisis zone. When it affects your stakeholders, people start calling you. And like particularly personal people involved with personal crisis, like celebrities, when they have that, how you know there is a problem is when you start receiving phone calls. You're on the phone from morning to night. People are calling you. That video we saw, what happened? How, you know, that's a personal crisis. You know, so it's about, so the difference between the issues and the crisis. So you can see this acronym that I put here for issue. Issue only affects people, environment, and assets, which is PEA. But when it is a crisis, it affects PEARLS, people, environment, assets, reputation, license to operate, and stakeholders. Once it has gotten into that stage, you have a crisis, and you have to manage it differently than you manage an issue. I think the challenge that a lot of people have is that they want to manage crisis like issues. That's when you see people, you begin to do the kind of things that escalate it. And that's why we're here today to talk about the things that you can do or you need to do on a communication level that are different from how you would manage an issue, to make sure that when you have a crisis, you're able to de-escalate it. Now, the objective for crisis communication is to de-escalate. That's the core purpose. And I always like to hammer on this, because for me, if you push out a press statement or you respond on social media to an issue or a crisis, if it doesn't calm down, your communication has failed. It's not about the stakeholder. It's not about, oh, there was a campaign, oh, some social media activists, some influencers were creating problems. That's not the issue. Your communication has failed. It did not hit the mark. So that's something that you then need to work on. So in Nigeria recently, these are some of the headlines that have come up. You can see some examples of, crisis. They're all crises. Like the fuel crisis, you can actually see the word there. Also, we can see that happened. I won't go into so much detail about that because those of us from Nigeria know what that was about. And it's ongoing up till now. Some adulterated fuel got into the supply chain. And then there was a lot of finger pointing, who did what, who did this, and all that. The main National Oil Corporation pointing fingers at some of the downstream marketers pointing back at everyone. The point is we have adulterated fuel in the market. And we'll talk a little bit about how that was managed in a communication context. So this also happened, an oil spill that happened in the oil producing area recently as well. And that also went on for a long time. You can see the headline, we can no longer breathe. I mean, oh, really? I mean, if you can't breathe, you will not be alive. You know what I'm saying? But then the point is that's what happens in a crisis. And that's the emotion, that's the sentiment that people are coming with, so, and that's what you have to respond to. So it's not about you now trying to bring logic into the conversation. The fact is, this is how people feel, and it's on the front page news. So this is all what the kind of, how would I say that, people have, and then you can then decide how you're going to manage that. So at this point, I want to launch a poll just to make sure. I'd prefer to think there were more people online, but I think I should just launch it anyways. What do you guys think? Kayode, should I launch it now? let me just.
Yeah, I think we can.
Okay, so good. Let me just launch it. So you should see a poll. And so the poll has questions. If you can see, please let me know if you can see it. And so the first one is, do you think it's right to respond to negative social media coverage? Does the end always justify the means in crisis management or crisis communication? You have 3 options there, yes, no, or sometimes. Then the third one is spin an effective form of crisis communication? So it's also all of them are single choice questions. So yes, no, sometimes, that kind of thing. And we just see that it's just a useful exercise for all of us to do. And then we see the kind of learning that we get from that as we go along. So yes. So I'm waiting for most of us to put in something, and then we'll continue from there. Okay, so please, just a few more seconds for that. I can see a mix of responses. And for those who may not know, spin means, I think most of us know what spin is. Spin is, when you want to spin a story and you just want to, it's a way in which people sort of like tilt the story with a bias towards their own perspective. It may not necessarily be, it's just, it's a way, they're just spinning it. It's not exactly, it may not exactly be factual, it may not exactly show a balance of perspective, but it's a way in which the person wants to play it. So 2 minutes, 1 minute more. At 12:15, we'll end it. We'll end the poll. Okay. Waiting for one more person to. Okay, so I'm almost rounding this up now. Interesting. So I'm seeing a mix. People are responding yes, no. Some say yes, some say no, some say only if necessary. Let me see. Okay, so I think, yeah, we can end the poll now. And okay, share the results. I hope I should be able to see the results as well. Okay. So from what we see here, most of us, on the first question, most of us believe that it is right that we should respond to negative social media coverage only when it is necessary. Good. Then on the second one, we said, does the end justify the means in crisis management? Majority of us said sometimes. Some people said no, 38% said no. Okay, actually it's evenly. We have a tie there. So half of us think, 38% think no and sometimes, and then some people say yes. 23% say yes. Then is spin, the last question, is spin an effective form of crisis communication? Majority of us said yes, sometimes. And then some of us said yes and others said no. So really interesting. I'm glad we took this this poll this early. So I will just end it here for now. So let me know if you can, you're back to see my normal screen.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Kayode, for coming in very quickly on that. So that's really, really interesting. So some of us think so many of us think that speed is useful sometimes. Okay, so what should be here is the topic of this one is how to handle negative media coverage. It's really good that we did this poll before. Okay, so now how do we handle negative media coverage? When media coverage comes, what you can see at the back of this was like during the AstraZeneca COVID the vaccine issue. AstraZeneca experienced such a really, really horrible time in terms of, the way in which people perceived, what was going on. Sorry, I can't seem to find my video panel. I hope I haven't hidden it somehow. Heidi, can you guys see me on the screen in my video panel? Are you seeing me or you're not?
Just your logo.
Okay, so something, it should be me showing. Let me see if I need to end end the poll somehow. So for some reason, it's not showing me anymore. Anyways, okay, so I'll just, please let me see if you can help me do something about that, Aaron, to make sure that I'm still showing on the panel. Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, so that's for me. Yes, sorry. My video, I mistakenly removed my video. Okay, so yeah, back to this. So yes, so when we have negative coverage, how do we first of all start? We start off by establishing our facts, what exactly has happened. We then assess our interests. The interest, in other words, how interested are people in what is going on? What's the conversation that is happening? How do we monitor the conversation? You monitor the conversation by finding out on social media, what are people saying? Where is this, whatever it is that is happening, where is it happening? If it's happening across platforms, when you are really it's a major crisis. Sometimes it doesn't even have to be across platforms. It may be very intense on one platform. It may be Twitter where it's happening, but then who is in the conversation? For instance, I remember there was a crisis situation that we had, which we're going to talk about, with a school recently in Nigeria that had, a student died in very unfortunate circumstances. I mean, by the time you hear people from the National Assembly speaking on that issue, you find the president of the country speaking on that issue, you are in a major crisis. Once stakeholders get involved. So this is what differentiates issue from crisis, because you have an issue with your customer. It's you and your customer that are having that issue. When people who are not involved in the issue start getting involved in it and taking more interest and carrying it in a campaign mode, you are really, and then your reputation is being questioned. Your license to operate, not that people are thinking, why should we even be allowing these people to continue to function? That is a major crisis. So you need to monitor that conversation. How is it progressing? Where is it taking place? Which stakeholders are active in it? Then you need to think about if you're going to respond to what sentiment is being expressed. I want to really focus on this number 5 of sentiments, because I think a lot of people ignore this in crisis communication and crisis management. Because in crisis management and communication, most of the time, it is the sentiment that is the issue. It's the sentiment. In fact, every crisis, it's the sentiment you should not ignore. Whereas I see people focusing on facts, focusing on legal standing, that's for issue management. Crisis, please, pack your legal standing and pack your facts. They are good for context, but it's the sentiment that is driving the stakeholder agitation. It is the sentiment that will bury that business if you are not careful. So as a person communicating and responding on that crisis, you had better respond to sentiment. And that was what I think in this particular case I talked about in that school. They failed to recognize the sentiment, the depth of the sentiment, the level of passion that the general public had brought together on that issue, and they were discussing other things. So they didn't address that, and the issue continued to escalate. In fact, for me, it was amazing just watching how it was escalating week on week. I was like, can't somebody tell these people? It was the textbook case of how not to manage a crisis and how not to communicate in a crisis. So the aim in crisis communication is de-escalate. And what I like about the kind of profession we're in, which is communication, and for those of us who are practitioners, for others who may not be, I don't know, this may apply or may not apply to your profession. In our profession of communication, you will know immediately whether your communication has hit the bar or not. Because if it calms down, you know that you have achieved something. If it continues to escalate, you need to adjust. So another area, number 7, is watch your language and your tone. How are you talking? Again, this particular case I referred to, they didn't watch their language, they didn't watch their tone. They were, at a stage, so they fluctuated. One press statement, the first press statement came out with a very defensive tone. That one annoyed everybody. That was when, in fact, that was what now convened everybody to take up a campaign against them. The second one, they got a very good tone, a tone of reconciliation, of care and commitment to investigate and find out what happened. Later on, they moved to a very strong and legal cease and desist tone. So anyway, they just lost the general public at that point. So they missed several opportunities to de-escalate through communication. Words are powerful. Words are powerful because words lead to war. Words lead to conflict. Anybody that tells you can say anything anyhow, that is somebody you should really not pay attention to. So your language, I can say, come here with a different tone. I can say, come here. I can say, come here. It's a different tone. It's the same words. So as communications practitioners, we need to watch language and tone in crisis communication, because sometimes you may be saying the right thing, but the tone of the messaging is so offensive to the people that hear it that you end up escalating the issues. So engaging key stakeholders, that's that on the communication side. Engaging key stakeholders is an important part of crisis management. So you can't be responding to crisis on press statements and then you're not talking to the people who are stoking the fire. As a comms professional, when I used to manage these things, we used to stay on top of these things. Ideally, there should be a crisis management team when you're managing a crisis. So when you know the people who are active in that crisis, particularly if there's a core stakeholder, engage the person. But before you go, where communication comes in is people need to sit down and agree. This is what we need to tell this is the issue. This is what we can't say. This is how we're going to say it. This is when we're going to say it. This is who we're going to engage. And you choose very carefully the person that is going to communicate that message. If it's going to, and then you determine, is it going to be a face-to-face communication? Is it going to be closed door? Or, so all of that, you sort of agree. But where the communication person comes in is they craft the messaging of what you should say and the tone of what you would say. And you would have done your research on what the interest of the stakeholder is so that you make sure that you address it. You will also have done your research to ensure you understand the conversations that are being had so that you respond to that as well. You determine the nature of your response, which I've been saying, then you monitor and you tweak. I hope I'm communicating, please. So still on this theme of how to handle negative media coverage, you shouldn't blame the victim. Never. That's the worst thing you can do. And I see a lot of people doing that. It is the most, if it's in a crisis, oh my goodness, you'll be sunk, you'll be buried, you'll never come out of it. Particularly it's a multi-stakeholder crisis and a lot of people are involved in it. And we've seen many like that. I mean, in Nigeria recently, we had one, we've had about 2 with schools. We had one with a hospital where a patient, there was claim of medical negligence. Although they were not, they were initially a bit defensive. After a while, they stopped speaking to the press. But either way, it didn't, well, they came out of it, at least their operations weren't stopped and all that, but there was a lot of negative press. I think there was a bit of a sanction as well. But never be defensive, particularly if human lives are involved. I will tell you, there's something we call the 3 C's. When human lives are involved in crisis communication, you must always make sure you demonstrate those 3 C's. It's care, it's control, and commitment, starting off with care. We'll talk a little bit about that. Please don't use aggressive language. I get highly offended when I see people, like this school I talked about. The last press statement they issued a cease and desist to the general public. On what basis? I don't understand. Why would you do that? You say people is now issue a cease and desist that people should not talk about what's going on in your school. Who's you have no right to do that. You can address media houses, but you have no right to issue a cease and desist to the entire public. It's highly offensive. Of course, nobody paid any attention to them. So even though you want to reserve your legal rights, you don't issue a blanket cease and desist. You can say to people, please, these are the facts, we would like it if people don't stop it. Manage your tone, because at the end of the day, it's results you're after. So if you're antagonizing people, including the key stakeholders, what is the result in that? So don't also ignore sentiments. Don't look at things from your own perspective. That's taking an insular perspective. Don't look at it from and I think that's a major problem. And when you are looking at it from your perspective, it becomes obvious even in the way you communicate, because you are then sharing it. Everybody can see that you're not even hearing what we're saying. You're not responding to our concerns. So again, don't ignore social media, and please don't overreact, under-respond, or do nothing. An ostrich session doesn't really help in crisis communication. So these are some public examples. I won't say too much on it because it's not intended to be a name and shame, but it's just to show that this is really real. This was a bank that had to make a public statement about something that was an issue that was almost becoming a crisis. At the end of the day, they needed to make a change at their leadership level because the issue was getting out of hand. They did nothing for quite a while, hoping that it would blow over, but eventually when they saw that it wasn't blowing over, they then responded. But by that time, there had been some damage to their brand. Some memes had come up on social media, using their brands in really questionable ways. But eventually they issued a press statement, and then they made a change, which is that. So they made a change at their leadership level, which is what is important. You don't just communicate, but you let your actions align with what you're saying. And why this was good was that it showed that they had listened to what public sentiment was about, and they were responding appropriately, and their communication reflected that. So you don't just say one thing and do something else. So again, to the people who said spin is sometimes necessary, spin can backfire on you. And if it's a multi-stakeholder, very complex thing, spin will, because people will now take interest in coming out to show why what you said was wrong and how you are lying and you cannot be trusted. Therefore, for that reason, we should do this, we should do that. Now, this was a school also in Nigeria. There was an issue of molestation against the students. The parents brought it to social media. I classify this as an issue because it didn't, first of all, bring about a multi-stakeholder campaign. There was a lot of reporting. It almost became a crisis. The school they de-escalated it pretty well, but let's just say they de-escalated. I think they could have done better. They could have shown more care. I think their first press release was very, very strongly worded. It was a bit defensive, talking about the reputation of the school, the values and all of that, and didn't show that much compassion for the child, in my view. So they got away with it, but it's not best practice, in my view. That's just my view. It's not best practice. They got away with it. If it happens another time, they need to change that approach. This is also another school, also in Nigeria. They also, in this case, there was unfortunately, something happened to the child. The circumstances about it are not clear. The parents made some allegation. This crisis is still ongoing. That's the one I referred to earlier. It's still ongoing simply because the de-escalation that should have happened, the opportunities to, first of all, engage the core stakeholder, which is the family, and reconcile. Clearly, that wasn't done. The communication that came out was very, very defensive. It continued to be defensive. And I think they just never really understood that this was not just about what had happened. This was parents and people expressing concern and saying, we're really concerned about safety in schools. And this is one example too many. So there was a lot of people were like, we need to get to the bottom of this. We must make sure this kind of thing does not happen again. The school just was never really able to grasp that. So the communication always fell short. And spin, of course, did not help them. So the school has been shut since last year, and we don't know when it's going to be open. And you know what that means. So these are real things. And personally, like I said, from where I stand, it did not have to go this way. This has been poorly handled. In fact, I would say it anywhere. This was very poorly handled, because in crisis management, and crisis communication, it's not about what you did. It's not about what happened. It's about your response. And that's why communication is very important, because communication is what will now calm people down. But it has to be addressed at the sentiment, at the stakeholders. It also has to be sincere, because that sincerity will come through in your communication and in your action. Whenever I advise on crisis management, I always make sure actions are being taken. But I listen to stakeholder sentiment, because I know as long as we do not address that sentiment, the crisis is not going to die. But a lot of people are a bit ignorant of this, and they think they can muscle their way through. That's why we see, like, literally on Nigerian social media, there's one crisis every week. A lot in the celebrity space, a lot in the political space, and then every now and then we're beginning to see now, particularly education sector, there seems to be a real exposure in that area. There's health sector, to those two sectors. So far, manufacturing, fast moving consumer goods, they have very established communication setup. So I think they can handle things a bit better. But I also think I've seen them use, they also tend to move very quickly into the legal space. I have a background in the oil industry. So we are very used to people launching campaigns against us, and as in really launching year-long campaigns, January to December, year back to back. So we know what can happen. So we have learned not to antagonize stakeholders. A lot of people, banking sector, they don't understand that yet. But I know that as time goes on and social media activism begins to go, all of us will eventually get the memo. Now, this is an example of an issue. It's not a crisis. So when you see what I'm doing in all these public examples, is showing the difference between issues and crisis. But if an issue is not handled well, like really that other education example I gave, it was an issue initially. If it had been well managed with communication, it would not have escalated to a crisis. So what this lady did, she nipped it in the bud when she saw that the conversation around the film, and this was, so I'm giving different examples. We've shown education, we've shown banking. I haven't shown health one, but I've talked about that. This is entertainment. So she came out and did a video and responded to the critics, people who were criticizing the movie and saying it was this, it wasn't that. Why did she do that? I saw a lot of people asking, why did she need to do that? She did that because she was smart, because she knew that this was potentially affecting her reputation, was potentially affecting her brand. Okay, time up. Okay, yeah. So thank you. I'm watching my time. It was potentially affecting her brand. So she needed to address that. So she did that, and then everything then quieted down. So it was successfully de-escalated. Some people took an issue with, okay, the tone of her communication. So yes, I think that was an area she could have worked on. And even though some people took an issue with it, it wasn't enough. A lot of people, the sentiment had been largely addressed. People felt, oh, she actually took the time to come and address us and apologize. So that means she recognizes that the viewing public is a stakeholder that she needs to consider. So she de-escalated it, and that was it. That was the end of that. That's the way to handle this thing. But like I said, the only feedback I will have given is that tone could have been moderated, because if people took it in a different way, it may also have gone another way. Now, I want to step away from the Nigeria examples, because I know there may be people on the call who are not from Nigeria. So globally, and I do want to pick in other countries that I may not be so familiar with. So I don't know how many of us watch Formula One. There was this entire I would call it was a fiasco, I'm sorry, that happened recently. I'm not a Formula One follower, but because of Lewis Hamilton, I started following him, so I knew about all of that. So I've been watching his races in Brazil, in Abu Dhabi, across it, and all of that. And the final, we're all waiting for what would happen. And then the race director made a very controversial decision. And I don't know the dynamics of how they do it, but anyways, he did it in such a way that at the end of the day, the person who ordinarily had not been the leader in all the subsequent laps ended up being the leader. It was a very controversial win. And a lot of people were so upset. They felt it was stage managed. Even the reigning champion, Lewis Hamilton himself, was not happy about it. There was a massive campaign on social media for weeks. In fact, people said they're not going to watch Formula One anymore. It's stage managed, so it became a crisis. It became a real reputation crisis for them. They could have chosen to ignore it. And this is why I tell people, when people say, our sector is different, we are this, I'm like, you need to talk to people who earn money from reputation. Reputation is currency. So show me someone whose reputation doesn't matter to them, then show me somebody who really doesn't have anything that is what, you understand what I'm saying? You don't have investments, you don't have assets, clearly, if you say you don't care. Now, your reputation, you may be the kind of person who thrives on controversy. That's fine. But even that controversy, there's a certain type of controversy that you are making money from. If another type of controversy comes that is outside of that, it is a problem for you. For instance, if people now say you have been deceiving people, a lot of the content or whatever, whatever it is, all of us, whether we are in what kind of business we're in, there is some level of credibility that goes with that thing that we're doing that is keeping us in that space. So anyways, this happened. Eventually, Formula, well, they couldn't upturn the verdict, but eventually they now had to come out last week to remove the controversial race director. And because Lewis Hamilton stayed off social media, people thought he was even going to give up racing entirely. And in fact, that would have been a stain on them. So they addressed it by removing the race director, even though they didn't say it was because of this person. But by doing that, they now assuaged that feeling that people had. And that then made everybody happy. Lewis Hamilton immediately came out, gave a press conference, told everybody this is not going to define me, and all of that. And that calmed everybody down. The thing raged from December till this month. This decision just came out like last week. So that's the way you manage crisis communication, which is why I said, like I said, spin. They try to spin it. They tried to spin it. With this one, it is in line with the rules. It is what nobody was listening to them. You robbed Sir Lewis. That was everybody's thinking. So it didn't matter. So this is one of my best practices of of crisis communication. Is that okay? Yes, hands raised again. Okay. So the royal, I'm almost done. The royal family put up and thanks for prompting me again. The royal family, so the queen is going to celebrate her platinum anniversary this year. And they realized that with the issues going on with the Duke of York, her son, if they don't do something about it, it's going to overshadow it. And they didn't want anything to overshadow it. So they came up with this press statement, which for me was iconic. Again, so when I see people protecting, you have somebody in your office, the person is causing problem to your brand, you are saying because he's the owner of the business. I think that's why your business is not transgenerational. Because the royal family that has lived for hundreds of years, nobody is bigger than the institution. So they took a very reasoned decision, they took action, and they communicated it. They removed him. He's not going to undertake any public duties. He's going to be defending the case as a private citizen. All the royal patronages, they returned to the queen. That's her own son. That, of course, took a lot of the flack off them. So she can have a platinum anniversary in peace. The integrity of the institution is preserved. So you have to de-escalating from communication, through communication, you manage the issue from source. So this is where spin is not the right way. Because if you have not managed the issue, you have not addressed, there's an issue that is driving that sentiment, the negative sentiment, you haven't managed it, then you are spinning in public. In this social media age, all it takes is somebody to go and unravel all what you have done and bring it out into the public space. And then you'll be fighting that lost battle for the rest of your life. You may be lucky, which is why I said, if people are not so interested, you spin it and they leave it there. Okay, fine. But if people have decided for some reason, and what happens is that, like what happened with that education institution that I talked about, there had been many incidents in schools that had been happening. People had been watching. This school was the one that collected the fullness of the cup. So you don't know when you are going to be the person that will happen to. We call it amplifiers. These things amplify the crisis. Sometimes it may not even be something in your sector. Maybe just there's something else going on, maybe like the pandemic, and you now happen to do something that robbed people on the raw at that time. So all of that, you need to then address that issue and then talk about it. You respond on the platform that the conversation is being had on. So if it's social media, then respond on social media. If it's on print, go on print. Don't carry it from where it shouldn't be. But if it is everywhere, then please, by all means, you respond everywhere. Again, aim to de-escalate. If it's not de-escalating, your communication is not working. Ensure your response ages well. That's another thing, which is why I will never advise anybody to spin, because the internet never forgets. So if you have come out and said something that was not true, it's not factual, it's not verifiable, and later it's found out not to be true, it's a matter of time before you are called out, and you may not enjoy it on that day. At that time, there may be a whole lot more at stake than what is at stake now. And for me, there's nothing, when something has happened, there's nothing wrong in saying we made a mistake, or you understand, or really, I don't understand why it's so difficult, because language, and that's why some of us are professional wordsmiths. You can explain it. You can explain. And then you ask the stakeholders, you have the behind the scenes conversation. What can we do to make this better? They will tell you, you negotiate, you have a whatever, and then you come and communicate what you've agreed to do. It resolves the sentiment. People will leave you. And hopefully you will have learned from the experience, and then you change your practices ongoing. You have the right to continue. Why make it more complex by spinning and lying? I don't know. It perplexes me when I see those kind of way people handle certain things. So please, and don't try to oversimplify the issue. I see some people doing that, particularly in the political space. They oversimplify. They say, no, it's not that serious. Okay. That's why you continue to have crisis upon crisis. So also, if people are involved, lives are involved, these are the 3 C's I mentioned earlier. Your statements, your responses should always demonstrate care. Please, if it is something like an incident that you need to, maybe there was a fire or whatever, let us know that you are in control. These are the things, emergency response has been activated. Say the things that you've done to bring it under control, and then make a commitment about how you're going to make sure this is not going to happen again. This is what builds credibility. And this has nothing to do with Spain. So anyways, I think I'm looking forward to our questions. I'm just going to fast track now. So in crisis communication, we should always think about balance, speak to the heart as well as the mind. Don't go 100% logical. I saw some press releases. Anyway, there's a question coming up. Anyways, speak to heart as well as mind. So if you need to make sure people understand what you're saying and they can relate with it. So in crisis communication, you will have the engagement with some stakeholders behind the scenes, the people you need to talk to face, you do that. And then the people you need to speak to through statements, you should also do that. Don't let your key stakeholder be hearing what you have to say through press releases. That's not right. And that's what I've seen in some of the examples that I talked about, particularly that school. You could see that their press statements were taking the core stakeholder by surprise, which is why every time they did that, the family would then come back and issue a video, which will be even more damaging. So really, for me, I can actually draw a flow chart as to how the actions they took actually escalated that thing into a crisis. Very poorly managed. Really, oh my goodness. The worst managed crisis I've seen in a very long time. It didn't have to happen that way. And it was all the communication. They kept saying the wrong thing. And that is where we really need to be careful. This is very, very serious. So avoid legalese. I've talked about this. I won't go too much about this. Anyways, I think I'm running out of time. I don't want this to be a monologue. Oh, I've spent so much time. So let's just go into the questions. I think let's just open it up to questions now. And please follow me on Twitter, on Instagram, or all of you that are here today, please. This is our Instagram handle. So let's open it up for questions. Kyle, do you have any questions coming?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much, Mark, for that session. And I have actually learned 1 or 2 things, and I actually follow Formula One, and I saw how people reacted to to that decision that they took, and the way you explained it as well, it made so much sense. And yeah, and not only me, some people had takeaways from your session. Okay. Irene Deodua says reputation is currency, a key takeaway from me. And Damilola said better to understand the facts and not rush into responding to the issues raised. Isioma Masiodu Otubo said reputation is currency. They took action and communicated. That's powerful. Olusho Alamina said, indeed, the internet never forgets. Yes, the internet never forgets. And Opeyemi Adeyemi says, thanks, Shola. Very good examples. Excellent mix of local and international. So thank you very much, Ma, for this session. It was very, very insightful. And if you have any questions, you can, let's make use of the Q&A session. I see that there are questions there already, but let me read the first one, that came in. Let me just go through the first one that came in. So yes, the first question is, what fundamental principles undergird the process of crisis communication to enhance the chances of achieving the objectives of the organization? That's the first question.
Okay, so I think that has already been answered a lot in what I have said. So it's a lot of things. It's really about, first of all, wanting to do the right thing, making sure that you understand the issue, making sure that you speak to the stakeholders and that you de-escalate. In fact, that's the main thing. Respond to the issue and the stakeholders. In crisis communication, like I said, the difference between issue and crisis is reputation, license to operate, and stakeholders, RLS. Please remember that. But a lot of people don't pay attention to that. So if it's your reputation that is at stake, make sure that you are managing and protecting that reputation, not by being defensive, but by addressing the sentiments to the satisfaction of the stakeholders. Because what will happen, you see where license to operate is important, is that, like what happened with this school, eventually people said they should shut down. Who could have imagined? And this is Nigeria, where we know that anything, I'm sorry to say, we're not exactly the most well-known for holding people accountable. But as I'm speaking, because of public activism and all of that, public sentiments, the school has been closed. So their license to operate was questioned because of an issue that took place in their school. I'm sure they're all in shock. They're like, how could this have happened? They'll probably be blaming the family, but no. I personally, they should hold themselves responsible. Of course, recently we heard that earlier in the year, the board stepped down. So I think that's an acknowledgement that they needed to make an internal shift. But as I speak to you, it is still unresolved. So these are the principles. You respond to, you manage the stakeholders, you respond to the sentiment, you don't take an inward view, you take the external perspective, you share, you demonstrate care, you control, and then a commitment, you resolve, and then you communicate. And then when you see that if it continues to escalate, you tweak and you modify. But the goal should be escalation. So next question, Kayode.
Thank you very much for that. Sorry. Yes, thank you very much for that.
And please, sorry, for everybody in the session, please give feedback. Or I hope I'm communicating. I hope I didn't speak too fast. If you're not from Nigeria, please let us know that you're in the chat so that we know that some people from Nigeria are not from Nigeria are there. Just give us feedback, really, please. And I really appreciate your joining. Thank you so much. Okay, back to you, Kayode.
Thank you, Ma. So we have a question from Isiom Asiodu Otuboro. So the question goes, how do you de-escalate a situation when people are violent and abusive to you personally?
Well, that is, if they're violent and abusive to you, that again, like I said, is the sentiment. So then you look for a mediator. You look for somebody. If it's impossible for you to come face to face into the room with the people, then you find people who can engage with them. But what you do not do is do not engage. But again, like if it's an issue, there's some stakeholders that you honestly cannot communicate with. But what you then do is you manage your reputation. So you will go into the public space and explain to people. For instance, there was an example that happened recently, Airpeace, yesterday, the airline in Nigeria, where there was it's an issue, but I think they handled it pretty well. There was an allegation said that they treated a royal person, I don't want to mention names, pretty poorly. So they came to the public space and they responded with a very conciliatory tone. This is not what happened. We're surprised. This is what we did. And everybody was like, they really, no, but there's no problem. So that's it. So I know they will still be engaging, those parties behind. And they will look for people that can speak to them. So even if they don't want to talk to them. So you do all of that. But where crisis communication is that you first have to do a stakeholder analysis. And then you respond to each person. So I think that was what was missing in some of the cases we've looked at. When you do your stakeholder analysis, you know that, okay, there are some people talking about it on social media, so I need to talk to them. Then there's the core stakeholder, this person that feels aggrieved. And it is the sentiment that is coming forth from this person that people are looking at. If the person is not willing to speak to me, who will the person be willing to speak to? So that's how you manage it. Of course, if it's personal threats and things like that, of course, you involve the police. You do the law enforcement side, but you make sure you're not defensive. You make sure you do not return aggression for aggression, and then you manage it. You also get your legal advice, but watch your tone throughout the process. You don't say because they are being aggressive, you don't respond with aggressiveness, particularly if you have a brand and you have a reputation to protect. Let people see It's like the Ukrainian crisis now. I've noticed that the Ukrainians have played a very skillful crisis communication game. They are making sure that in everything, is being clear to everybody. We are not the ones causing this problem. Oh. These people are the ones attacking us unprovoked. Everything we are doing is self-defense. And that's the narrative. So no matter what Russia says, I'm sorry, do you understand? Because the way they have their own narrative coming from their mouth. So, but Ukraine, despite everything going on, I see them being careful about what they are saying. So that's what I mean, that it's possible, even when people are coming at you, you still moderate your tone and let everybody know who the aggressor is. But by the time you start fighting by now, okay, it's not clear who is really the aggressor. I hope that answers your question. Whoever asked the question, please give me feedback whether that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, ma. Thank you, ma. So, Isiom, let us know if that answers the question. And if you have any follow-up question, you can also put it in the Q&A and it will be taken. Thank you very much for that question. So, we have another question from Anne-Marie Palmer Ikuku. So, she says, Shola, can we talk about Boris Johnson and how he managed the COVID party issue? It's quieting down, but I am not sure it was by comms. He opened up the economy. From the comms angle, what should he have done? Who should he have engaged?
So to be honest, that's a very good question. So I think he managed it. So political crisis communications can be a bit tricky depending on the context that you find yourself. But I think Boris handled it pretty well. So he managed the stakeholders, and politicians most of the time in the developed world, they know this. First of all, he knew that there was problem coming from a particular opposition party. It's not yet down yet, but at least at every time he keeps on acknowledging, okay, yes, I did this right. There are a lot of things they didn't do well. For instance, like sometimes he first said he was not at the party, then later he said he was at the party. So there was a little bit of a mix up there. And I think the reason why it escalated to this extent is because it wasn't upfront. Although really, there's no way you can explain away violating COVID protocols while you were telling the whole nation to go under lockdown. So there was a bit of sensitivity around that. Time will tell whether he would really be out of it. But I think what is playing to his strength is that I think the UK is already wary of too many changes at the Prime Minister's level. And I think the Conservative Party, he has the backing of his party by and large. They think this is not a big enough issue for them to, to cause something against him. So at best, it's just really, how would I say, a little bit of a political nuisance for him, So that changes. But in the eyes of the public, again, there's bipolarism in most of in the developed world and everywhere. Everywhere, nations are so divided into, one camp and the other camp, that it sort of protects people in the political space, even when they are doing things that they should not be doing. But their reputation continues to be affected regardless. But what happens to such leaders is that they are forever in crisis mode, which is what is happening to him, which is what is also happening in our own local context. They're forever on the treadmill. Do you understand? They don't have rest. So because they're constantly managing, protecting and defending. Is that the normal way to run your whatever? So for me, it's like it's a matter of choice. If that's the choice you've made, and because in politics you can do that, and they can do that in politics because nobody is, well, it depends actually, because sometimes it can also backfire. So maybe you've looked at the situation and you've weighed it and you feel it is worth. But the point is, you will be constantly on that crisis treadmill. Every day you're answering press conference, this and that, rather than facing other issues. So fine, if you have the energy and the appetite for that, continue. And then when it comes to the elections, that's when we then know whether you are really going to pay the price for what has happened. So I hope that answers your question to some extent. I don't think the communication was well handled because I think they tried to spin it. So that's a good question, Anne-Marie, because I think Boris is a spinner. So they believe in spin. And of course, eventually videos came out showing where he was. So his response didn't age well, which is why, like I said, I would never recommend anybody to do spin. I mean, go no comment. No comment is even better if it comes to that. Why will you come and lie? Okay, refuse to comment, decline to comment. And then, that's, although, I would prefer that to spin. For me, spin is a no-no, not in this social media age. And even the Prime Minister of UK couldn't prevent his videos from coming out. So in Nigeria, what do you think he will bury? All it takes, you go and give your laptop somewhere, somebody will take it out and upload it on Naira Land. And Anyway, so next question, please.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that one. So BC Adeyemi
Yeah.
says, what if the CEO is at the center of the crisis and he or she is also a significant owner? Who initiates communication and what would they be communicating?
So if the CEO is at the center of the crisis, I hope the CEO has a board. The CEO, I hope they have a board that can hold them to question. If the CEO is also the chairman of the board, and for whatever reason the person cannot be told the truth, well, then that is a major problem. The CEO will take the hit. But there has to be a crisis management team to look at what is the nature of the problem. What is the issue? What is at stake? Because again, like I had said when I said at the beginning, what makes a crisis is your reputation is being affected, license to operate, and then stakeholders, RLS, those three things. If your license to operate, in other words, people are saying whatever it is you hold, whether it's your business, they're saying they want to shut it down, they're saying we should not give you this or that. If that is being threatened, then you need to take action to address what is causing it. And somebody should, if other people are not, able to give you that heads up, then I'm sorry, then I really don't know what's going to happen. But ideally, if things are working well and it's the CEO that needs help, you should assemble a team, look at the nature of the issue, get professionals on board to come and help you. They look at the issue, they decide what you need to do, and then you then begin to communicate what your action is. So that's what I would say. But if it's a personal crisis and if you can, and that's why I said, look, I'm yet to see the crisis that you cannot communicate about. It's language. Like I said, I worked in the oil industry. We faced the company I worked for. There were major issues. We would, if it's one line, we will write it. No matter, you can always say it. It's conversation. But before we go and say that one line, if no number of people that will have sat down in one place, we will sit down, we will look at the issues, we will do stakeholder mapping, who said what, where are they saying, what is the issue? We will do investigation into our own system and find out what were the circumstances, what happened. We assemble multifunctional teams. We are very sure what our current reality. Then we look at that conversation in the current context. What is going on now? If we are doing an IPO, for instance, we know that this is going to harm the IPO. So we know that there's another stakeholder around the people who are taking the IPO. Those are the drivers. We bring that into the conversation. And then we then say, based on what is going on, what are the actions we should take? We agree those actions. What are the ones we are going to communicate publicly, if necessary? What are the ones that we're going to communicate to our stakeholders privately? And how should we sequence the communication? Who says what, when, and where? At what platform? And you don't just, some of these things may not even require you making a press conference. It may not even require you issuing a tweet or anything. You may only be handling it behind the scenes. For instance, like the example I gave about the education people, if they had handled that thing behind the scenes with the right message, language, and tone, it would not have gotten to where it did. But they took a very defensive, legalistic, oh my goodness, they will have a lot of time to think about what they did wrong for the next how many years. A classic textbook case of how not to manage a crisis and how not to communicate in a crisis. This I thank you for joining, by the way. Thanks, December, as well. I hope that answers your question, because I know there's some context behind it, but I'm not sure, if I addressed it properly.
Yeah. Thank you for that one. So we still have like a couple of questions, and because of time, I wanted to ask you if maybe you want to ask them if it's okay for us to still go ahead with the Q&A, because the session is supposed to be 1 hour, and we're almost at 1, but we still have a couple of questions.
So I'll say let's take the questions. Because I think some people joined a little bit late. I know it's Saturday and all that. So, but if you need to go, I won't keep you more than 5 or 10 minutes more. Please, if you are violently opposed to that, let me know in the chat. But otherwise, I will bring this to a close by 1:05 or 1:10. If you have any other questions you want me to address, please say so. And again, I have my Instagram handle up here, because I'm also appealing to you guys to please follow us on Instagram. Because I do a lot of little sound bites and coaching sessions, some of these things. And I really want your feedback as to what you would like to hear more of. Even if there's anything I've said here that you feel we should do another webinar on, or later have a bit of a soundbite on Instagram and I talk it a bit, please say so as well. I love doing this sort of thing, I will do this, a long time. And if you're also a member of a team that you think you would like me to come and have a bespoke session with you as well, also say this, because what I've tried to put in here is 10 years of training and 10 years of experience of crisis management and crisis communication. There's a lot of stuff that I haven't mentioned because we simply don't have the time. We could have done a deep dive in each of the cases. We could have done a deep dive into crisis management principles, deep dive into crisis communication, specifics of all the cases, but we didn't have enough time. Eventually, I even had to rush off. So, Kayode, let's take the questions. So just to put that out there, the last 2 questions, please.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Moses Omogena says, where do we draw the line between de-escalation and long-term solutions? De-escalation, to a very large extent, would mean patronizing and playing on the intelligence of the audience, as opposed to showing transparent measures of making sure such incidents never happen again. Do they go hand in hand, especially in the police and health sectors, where the same incidents keep repeating itself over and over again?
You have an excellent point there. So what I would say is, when I use the word de-escalation, I am not saying you should spin, which is why I said you have gone to find out what the problem is, and you are already starting to make changes. Like I gave the example of the royal family. The royal family stripped the Duke of York of his duties before they came out to tell us. It's not cosmetic, and they are not going to restore it afterwards. So that is the institution already reforming itself. So they were announcing, they did not say we are going to. They said they were not, sorry, they were not announcing we are going to strip. As of the time the press statement hit, they already stripped him of his whatevers, of his duties, and that's for life. So that's the sort of thing, commitment you are supposed to make, which is why I said, particularly when people are involved. Now, if it is a long-term change, like you said, education and health sector, then you should also make that commitment to doing so. But again, if you don't, it's good for you to communicate that you've made that commitment. But if you don't follow it up with action, what it means that you will continue to have protests. And I know where you are going to with that question about the police. Yes, because they haven't made the changes they should have, it will continue to happen. It will continue. So it's just a matter of time. So de-escalation means de-escalation for the purposes of internal transformation. It's not for the purposes of just managing the headlines. Because, in fact, and I thank you for that question, because it helps me address what I would really like to say, which is that if you manage a crisis well, it should make your organization better as a result. You would have made the kind of change that would make it impossible for a repeat of that incident. And it's to your benefit to do so. In fact, some people, I like crisis personally, I'm sorry, even though I don't like personal crisis, but it's an opportunity. I always saw it as an opportunity to change things. So whenever I was working in the organization I was working in, and those crises came up, things that I had noticed in the past that I felt it shouldn't be this way, I will leverage on that crisis to drive home the message to business leaders. But I honestly believe that, even though I cannot question the intent and the motives of some of the people in the political sector, I think that they also do not have people advising them correctly. Because when I see the route they take is so long-winded, it actually is more difficult to spin and get away with spin than it is to tell the truth. So when I see that, I'm like, I can't believe you could really have gone straight. You chose to take this long winding route that you continue looking behind your shoulder for the rest of your life. But like I said, when you are not trained, you are not skilled, you don't have the expertise, you don't know the tools that are available for you in responding. Like I said, it's about language. So for me, like I said, I can write to anything using the right tone. Of course, you have to also be willing, because I would in my role, I don't, which is why I'm careful about the kind of clients I support. I am not in the business of I tell you as it is. This is how bad this is. This is what you need to do to make it better. These are the options that you have. if you take this option, it will go this way. So we do scenario planning too in crisis communication. I think people also don't do scenarios, which is why you see some people. So, and that's what I tell people. I say, when I stress test my messaging, so if the messaging is coming out, supposing I put this out, supposing the person says this. So we do that internal challenge. Many of these people, political people too, I see they don't stress test their messaging, which is why they are surprised when there's an uproar. Because if you have stress test your messaging, you will have known that this thing is not going to go down well. So if you choose not to care what people think, then that's a strategic position you have taken. And I will respect that. We should all respect that. But then whatever comes from that too, also take it. But what you cannot do is tell people how they should feel about your issue if you are not willing to address the sentiments or make long-standing changes. So to your question, yes, we're agreed. The reason you de-escalate for the purposes of transformation and you make changes, you should have taken action before you come and say it so that you don't spin. And you should follow through with that action. Otherwise, you will continue to be in crisis. So it's a judgment call, really. And that's why business leadership needs to be very, very highly skilled, very knowledgeable, exposed, and all of that. So last question, so that we don't keep everybody Saturday. Thank you to everybody for joining. I can see some high-powered people inside the participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma. So we actually have two more questions. And
Wow.
The first one is from another question from Isiom Asiodo Tupo. And it goes, Sola, please share on this agribusiness failures and their communication tactics.
Which business?
Agribusiness failures. Agribusiness failures.
Okay, those agribusiness. Oh yeah. So those ones, I think I wouldn't say they became crises for them really, but I think for many of them, because they had already failed, they didn't really care. So many of them had already gone bust, so they didn't really care. I don't know if there's any of them that is continuing, but their reputation totally went down the hill. So if any of them is going on now, I think they will still be battling with that. And that scenario, so sorry, to give people context, this was like a crowdfunding agri-tech platform thing that happened in Nigeria, where a lot of people put money into them. And then during the pandemic, a lot of them failed. They couldn't give people back the returns that they had asked them, they had promoted and all that. And the communication around it wasn't well managed. And there were several just on and on. But clearly, like I said, so that's a perfect example of people who were caught snapping. They didn't really do anything about it. So I think, as far as I'm concerned, the message out there is don't invest in those people anymore. So if that is different, nobody has communicated that. So none of them can come and market me, because I'll be like, really? Did you think I didn't read all of that social media conversation? So that exactly is the point, which is why you can't leave things hanging, and you shouldn't spin it too. So if there was an issue, there should have been a whole communication around how the pandemic has affected them, what they're going to do differently, how they're going to make it up, and then, there should have been a whole narrative around that, and engagement, maybe even stakeholder sessions, open Twitter spaces. There could have been stuff that they could have done, but I think they were too involved with what was going on with them. And I'm not sure many of them wanted to continue anyway. So their business model was fundamentally challenged. So yeah, that's really the risk you have, which is why crisis management is different from issues management, and it requires a very stakeholder sensitive and driven response. And you really just have to be on top of your game in terms of how you manage the communication. Last question, please.
Thank you for that. This participant would like to be anonymous.
Okay.
She said, pardon me, I joined a little late. Okay. Don't know if these have been raised. Two questions in one, actually. And the person says, how does an organization communicate to its employees and investors when they are in serious financial crisis? And the second question is, how can managers and leaders build their communication skills personally, especially when they work in organizations that don't invest in training and doesn't see communication as an important part of their function?
So good, really, 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 really good questions, I would say. So what I would say is that, first of all, I think it's very easy to communicate about financial crisis. So first of all, the board has to decide what are they willing to tell the people. What does success look like for them? What is the risk of not sharing this information? Because again, you don't just communicate for no reason. I always start, whenever I have a conversation with a client or a business leader, I start off from what are your strategic objectives? What are you trying to achieve? Because if we don't start off from that, we're just going to be working and doing all sort of stuff. So if we find out that there is a risk, in other words, I need the employees to know this is what is going on, because we're going to start effecting some cost-cutting measures. It may affect their salary or blah, 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 blah. Then you need to now say, okay, there is a problem. This is what I need to tell them. This is what we can't say. And this is how we're going to tell them. And this is who we're going to tell. Like I said, I worked in the oil industry. Whenever the oil price crashed, and we knew that it was going to affect our budget and our spend, our employers did not waste time. People think the oil industry doesn't suffer from financial problems. Every time the oil price crashes, it affects us. So immediately they call us into a town hall. Before the town hall, they will have sat down with us communications people. They will have talked about the messaging, the business will bring in the messaging, the financial people and all that. We will craft a messaging that we're going to share to different categories. There'll be messaging to the leadership messaging. There'll be messaging to supervisors and messaging to all staff. They will all be consistent, but there may be differentiation in terms of confidentiality of certain things for different levels. But everybody will know there is a situation right now because of the oil price. It has reduced the funding that we are getting from our joint venture partners. Therefore, there will be impact on our projects, on this and that. All onshore projects stopping, offshore ones, we will communicate it with immediate alacrity. In fact, sometimes we'll tell people a freeze on promotion. So nobody, and it used to work. Staff, because they will be happy that you have communicated to them. You understand what I'm saying? So we used to do that. But people would have sat down to, like I said, we slice and dice the communication per level, per strata, and all of that. It is doable. Financial crisis is a given for anybody. It's not a big deal. But the problem is when you feed the grapevine by not communicating. So leadership, there's a space. Now, if you have communication skill as a leader and your overall leadership doesn't have, then that's a challenge. But what I would say is that depending on if you have a seat at the table, you can also bring some of this thinking in and let them know that certain things are possible. Then I would say, show that leadership skill in how you manage your team. If you can turn that communication into a strategic advantage in terms of how you manage your team and how you show up and sort of things that you do, eventually people will begin to take attention and it will rub off on others. I know about this because when I was working, like I said, in my full-time job, when I was working in the company I was working for before, there were many leaders who were not interested in communication. But what I did was that the few that were interested in communication, oh Lord, I saw communicated their projects. I made them shining stars within the organization. Before a matter of time, many others started running and saying, but Sola, why did they write this about this project? My project saved more money. My project did. I say yes, but yes, you people didn't give us any story. We said we wanted to know what successes you didn't have time for it. But that this guy has time for communication, so we are supporting his communication. That's the way it works. So communication is tell and show. It's not about just saying things. So I always show people, which is why, like today, if you see this session, I could have just been talking and I didn't show visual, but I needed to show you. I was also a bit conflicted because I didn't want it to look like I'm naming and shaming, and but I felt if I come here and I'm not giving specific examples, you guys just like Sola wasted your Saturday afternoon. So I had to choose examples that are in the public domain and then talk around it. But believe you me, I know a whole lot. There's a whole catalog of cases I could have talked about because it's always very glaring. So you can show how well to do it. Like when I saw the royal family's press release, I was like, I gave them a thumbs up. I was like, man, these guys, this is why they have been in existence for centuries and they're likely to be, because they know you do what it takes. And at the end, they're very enterprise first focused. Enterprise first means the institution, everything that comes in the interest of the institution, they do it rather than chasing sentiment. But you do it in an ethical way, not the end justifies the means. Like we had talked about, the end doesn't justify the means in communication. You may pay a heavy price. You may pay a heavy price, a very, very heavy, heavy, heavy price. It's avoidable. So if any of you, and let me just make this open call, if you have a context in your organization or personal life or whatever that you think fits into these issues or crisis space, and you want some advice, I can give you 30 minutes of pro bono advice. If you call me, just send me in fact, send me a DM either on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, Sola Abulu. Most of you know, if you join me, you know. Or you send an email, you saw the address through which you get the reminders and all that. Just, you know, at 30 minutes, we can have a chat. Pro bono, I will give you my views and my thoughts on what you're dealing with and how you can handle it. And of course, if you then need more support then that can be another conversation. So I think we can bring this to a close now. You guys have been really awesome. Kayode, can we bring it to a close?
Yes, ma. Thank you very much for all the questions that came in. And we know that some people joined much later.
Yes.
If you have questions, unfortunately, we can't take it live on the session now, but we can take it on all our platforms. So you can follow us on Instagram, that's SAA_consult, and you can follow us on LinkedIn as well, Facebook, Twitter, but we respond faster on Instagram and LinkedIn. So you can send us your questions, and like Mrs. Sola Abulu said, she's going to give 30 minutes, and you know, one thing I know with her is the 30 minutes, you know, can always extend, you know, based on how heated the conversation, you know, is. So I would implore you guys to, you know, take her up on that offer. And thank you very much for joining.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'm so grateful. Is there anybody that is not from Nigeria here? If you are, please just drop a note in the chat so that I can acknowledge your presence, because I know there are a lot of people from other parts of the world that registered. You like pearls? Okay, I raise the yes. That's one of the ways in which we actually it's. And I'm sharing with you stuff that I learned through training. I was crisis management trained for many years. I had to be validated. We would have a training session, as in crisis simulations for years. So the message I really want to pass across to all of us, whether you're a business leader, is that this is an expertise area that people develop skills in. It's almost like military training. So if you do not have the skills, please reach out to people who can help you if you are in a very serious crisis situation. But I'm sure that a lot of what you have picked on today at least will give you a little bit more. If you are getting people advising you to handle things in a particular way, you will be more, you know, you can be guided and say, no, I don't think I should handle it this way. So thank you, everyone. And I'm going to let you go off. If you have any ideas of what we should do next, please do so. Again, follow us on Instagram. I can see people are joining. I need more people to join us, please. Okay, thank you, Moses. I can see you have joined. Folu Flourish, I can also see you have joined. Other people, please join as well. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. I'm so grateful. Dorothy Stephen, thank you. Oh, you missed Pearls. My Pearls is people, environment. Oh yeah, somebody's answering. Assets, reputation, license to operate, and stakeholders. So yes, reputation, for a crisis, reputation, license to operate, and stakeholders is what makes the difference. If the issue is affecting your reputation, is affecting license to operate, and stakeholders are getting involved with it, then it's a crisis. But if the issue is only affecting people, that's your employees, your environment, and then your assets, it is an issue. So you can still manage it. But then you should try to manage the issue so that it doesn't become a crisis, because that is the trajectory. Issues become crisis. Sometimes crisis breaks out like a massive fire, but many cases they start off as an issue. When not managed well, they become a crisis. And then to now de-escalate it to an issue before it becomes nothing is then challenging. So I'll stop talking at this point. I don't want to close off the meeting because I can see people are still on. But thank you very much. You can all, you love the acronym. Thank you, Nkem. Oh, Nkem, thank you so much for joining. Thanks, everybody. A lot of you guys joined at 12:30, so maybe next time we'll start the session at 12:30. I don't know if that was the start time was the issue. So, Kyle, I think we can end the session now, right? Oh, Saul, thank you. Oh, bless you, Saul. Yes. Thank you. Yes, okay. So I think thanks, everybody. We'll share a link to the webinar afterwards too. I think 2 days from now. And so you can also have a look back again. And we'll be doing cutting out bits and pieces on Instagram as well. So if you're following us, you can see some of your favorite sessions that will pop up on your screen and remind you of some of the things you've learned today. So all the best, have a wonderful weekend, and speak to you soon some other time on our next webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye. So let's end the session.